that the country has been witnessing in the past 3 days amidst the ongoing outrage over the Agnipath scheme. The Defence Tri-Services today announced a detailed plan for Army's new radical recruitment plan. Now, calling this scheme a major reform, the forces have issued a very strong message to vandals amid the ongoing protests, saying that defence has no place for arson, adding that Agnipath will not be rolled back. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Narendra Modi also took an indirect jibe at the opposition, saying that good things get blocked in the name of politics. BJP has also launched a scathing attack at the opposition for politicizing this entire issue. And before we head into the big debate we are having today, let's also bring you all those details about how the government is making that outreach to those Agniveer aspirants. Let's also tell you about those major assurances being given by the Indian government. The first assurance, as we've broken down those assurances for you, is that no discrimination in service conditions. Because remember, for the former servicemen, there have been no discrimination so far, and even for Agniveers, there will be no discrimination. Same allowances will be offered to regular serving soldiers. Apart from that, 1 crore will also be a life insurance for martyrs. Remember, this is also part of the financial benefits that these Agniveers will be given. Assurance number 2 is that recruitment to rise to 60,000 in 5 years. Remember, there's been a lot of discussion about how the recruitment was not enough. Also, up to 1.25 lakh recruits per year subsequently. So this is what the final figure would be looking like. Quotas in state police, government departments as well is the third assurance that has been coming. Quotas have been announced by the states of Uttar Pradesh, Karnataka, Assam, Haryana, Madhya Pradesh as well. Now, the fourth assurance, and that is equally crucial, is that there's 10% quotas in paramilitary, defense, PSUs as well. And remember, the ministries that have announced that induction preference, some of them are, of course, civil aviation, ports and shipping, and housing, etc. So that is another big major part of the assurances that have been extended by the government. Class 12 certificate via National Institute of Open School is also one of the major assurances now being given by the government. And that is why the big question we are asking is that, are these assurances now enough? Also, assurance after assurance on Agnipath. Are these protests still justified? Especially taking into consideration the kind of violence that India has been witnessing in the last few days. And for that, let's bring in our guests now. And for that, I'm joined in by Shehzad Poonawalla, who's the BJP spokesperson, Uttam Kumar Reddy, who's a Congress MP and former Indian Air Force pilot, Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, who's a former DG Infantry, and Lieutenant General KJ Singh, who's the former General Officer Commanding-in-Chief of Western Command. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining our newscast tonight. Shehzad, if I may begin with you, have the assurances been enough, and are the protests even justified? Even if for a second you were to keep the vandalism, the arson, the violence aside and just focus on the peaceful means.
Firstly, it is an absolute privilege to share the panel with 3 people from the services, irrespective of the fact that they may or may not share my views. But it is an absolute privilege, and I thank them for their service to this country. Having said that, let me make a few points here. You know, आज मैं ये कहना चाहूँगा कि जो नकारात्मकता के नवाब है और झांसों के जनाब है, उनको तीनों सेनाओं के अध्यक्षों ने जवाब दे दिया है. But still there are a bunch of people whose agenda is to only spread falsehoods and to use violence as a means to topple the government. And today Priyanka Vadra has actually revealed her hand when she said that the ultimate agenda is to topple the government. Now look at the series of events that have taken place. You may or may not agree with a certain policy, although this policy is neither new, neither is it radical. It's been discussed since 1989. The Kargil Review Committee was discussing it. You had the Raina Committee. You had a bunch of people discussing it for a very long period of time, that we should improve our teeth to tail ratio to make our army younger, armed forces younger. But having said that, even if you have an issue with this policy, Irfan Ansari of the Congress party, and he's a MLA of the Congress party from Jharkhand, and I'm sure Mr. Reddy knows about him. He has said that there will be khoon se latpat sadkein. Is this the kind of protest that the Congress party wants to sponsor? Their NSUI district president has been arrested in Saharanpur for inciting and provoking people. You've had the Samajwadi party leader being arrested. This is the AICC mindset that I talk about, the arson inko chahiye committee mindset. I am saying whatever issues you may have, and we can continue to discuss all of those, but today all of us should be on one platform when it comes to condemning the violence and the provocation that has been done. And therefore I want to begin by the Right Honourable Congress MP condemning outrightly and telling us what action he will take on Irfan Ansari, because he is a Vidhayak from Jharkhand. So can we begin by that, and then we can answer all these questions coming forward. In fact, even Bhupesh Baghel has said that those who will train for 4 years will become Naxalis. Can you believe this kind of language is being used for people who will work in our army for 4 years, armed forces for 4 years? They will be training under Naam Namak Nishan.
Uttam Kumar Reddy, I'd like you to answer what Shehzad is saying. Why this fear that those recruits, after being, those 75% who will not be absorbed in, why this fear that they'll be resorting to violence, or why this mistrust?
Akanksha, let me first introduce myself to you and the panel. I'm a graduate of the National Defence Academy, and I flew the MiG-21s and the MiG-23s.
I'm aware,
Air Force fighter aircraft in several frontline combat squadrons. And I've also been very active in the ex-servicemen associations for many decades now. Also, I'm a member of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Defence. So there's certain things I must clarify. Mrs. Sonia Gandhi, the Congress president, from a hospital bed, clearly gave a call that protests, should be peaceful. So the Congress party is not for the violence associated with the protests. Then about the policy itself. The policy itself, I must tell you, has not been discussed in any parliamentary forum, in Parliament, or in the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Defence. And I must tell you, even when there were certain discussions relating to the manpower shortages, the government, the Defence Ministry, never came out with anything like what they're talking now. And I must, lastly tell you one thing, that on our ex-servicemen's group, there's a WhatsApp forward from an officer who was from the regiment of General Navrane, who is outgoing army chief, that he had disagreed with this particular system and that he was overruled. Now, having said that, just Akanksha, give me 1 minute. See, as I understand, the armed forces are recruiting about 60,000 people per year. Now, for the last 2 years, for COVID or whatever reasons, 130,000 shortage in the armed forces. Now look at this. Now there is regular shortage of so many people. Now the government of India today announces that they will no more do recruitment in a regular fashion for regular 15-year service. They will only do through Agnipath Scheme. I think with whatever knowledge I have of the services, this will definitely undermine the national security. And I don't think this is in the interest of the defence forces. I'm again repeating it. Today, the Defence Ministry announced they will no more do regular recruitment of soldiers who will serve 15 years. They'll only be recruitment to the Agnipath Scheme, and I don't think that is a good thing for the armed forces. Then, lastly, it is also a reflection on the Modi government of 8 years that unemployment is so high. Unemployment is so high that youth spontaneously erupted across the country. I believe that there is no political party, there is nobody fanning it. This was the youth out of their disappointment and frustration, and all the protests were spontaneous.